Okay, so today we're doing Elton John's 70s albums. Or should I say, although there will be an album from 1969, which was Elton John's first album, but it kind of became known in the 70s, so we're going to start there. So, but in essence, it's Elton John's 70s albums, which was, a lot of people would argue, was his peak period, certainly commercially and critically. Okay, and I also have 5 tiers on this tier list. So at number, at the top is The One. That's the top tier. At number 2 is Jules. At number 3 is Fantastic. At number 4 is Too Low to Be a Hero. And the bottom tier is Victim of No Love. So like I say, I'm going to go through Elton's 70s albums, putting them in the order that I kind of believe they should be in. Okay, so we're going to start off with Empty Sky, which was Elton John's first album, and it was released in 1969, although it wouldn't come out in the United States until January 1975. And this was early part of Elton John's career where the album wasn't produced by Gus Dudgeon, who would go on to do a lot of the other albums in this period. And I think it's quite a good album. It sounds of its time. I quite like the harp. You hear a harpsichord in a few of the tracks. And of course, one of probably the most famous songs on the album was Skyline Pigeon, which was then redone in a few years' time to go on the Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. I'm going to put in Too Low to Be a Hero. It's okay, it's a decent start, but for me, his real first big album is the self-entitled album Elton John, and this album came out in 1970, and actually this is one of my favourite Elton John albums, if not my favourite. Just great musicianship, great songwriting, great songs, and it's really this is kind of when you start to see Elton John's genius and Bernie Taupin's genius, and obviously the most famous song of it is Your Song, which is possibly Elton John's most well-known song, maybe after Candle in the Wind. So it's just a really good album, this one, a lot of good tracks on it, and there's a really good deluxe edition as well that I would recommend, where you get demos and alternate versions. But yeah, I love the production of this, I love the orchestration. So I'm going to put this in The One, the top tier. So we now move on to Elton's third album, which was Tumbleweed Connection. It almost had kind of like a Western feel, almost before the Eagles did with Desperado, which would come out a couple of years after this. But this album, released at the tail end of 1970, was quite a bit of a departure for Elton John, and it was also like Bernie Taupin loved country and Western films, and this wasn't a concept album as such, but it had kind of remnants of Westerns and stuff. And I don't think there was many big singles on this album, but it's a really good album, and I'm going to put this in Fantastic. Okay, so the next album we go on to is a live album that was released a few years later, although it came out at this point in the UK. And the album is 1911-70, so it's basically a live album. So this album, 1911-70, or the other way around, depending on the way you do the dates in the UK and the US. And this was recorded, as it says, in 1970. And there's not many tracks on this. It's okay. It's a good example of listening to early Elton John live. And so I'm going to put this in Too Low to Be a Hero, because it doesn't really feel like an official album at the time. So I'm going to put it there. And the next album is Madman Across the Water, which is one of my favourites, another favourite of mine. And it's got on it the iconic song Tiny Dancer, which has got a new lease of life in the 2000s. Tiny Dancer's been in numerous films, and it's a really well-known song and a great song. It wasn't a big hit at the time. And another favourite of mine on this album is maybe one of my favourite Elton John songs, Leave On, which is a brilliant song. It's just great, the instrumentation again and the orchestration, and a lovely song at the end, Goodbye, which is a short song, but it's just a really, really nice ballad. I'm going to put Madman Across the Water at the top. And the next album we now move on to is Honky, Chateau, which was released in 1972. And I think this album was okay. It had a couple of singles on it that people know, Rocketman and Honky. And this was recorded in France in the Chateau de Hourville, hence the album title. So I'm going to put this album in Fantastic. Okay. And the next album we have after that is Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. And this album, it's quite a poppy album, and it's kind of the last album he does before what is his biggest selling album, which we'll come to in a minute. So this one had classic singles on it like Daniel and Crocodile Rock. So I'm going to put this in duels. Okay. And the next album we're going to go to is what is probably Elton John's most well-known album and sold over 30 million copies and spawned many hit singles and is widely regarded as Elton John's masterpiece. It's a double album, which was quite unusual at the time, and massive hit all around the world. So it's kind of seen as his Sgt. Pepper. So I'm going to put Goodbye Yellow Brick Road up on the top tier in the one. And the next album after that was Caribou, which is quite a good album. It's hard to, how do you follow up Goodbye Yellow Brick Road? It's an almost impossible task. But it's quite good, and it has the classic singles Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me and The Bitch Is Back. And one of my favourite songs on the album is a song called I've Seen the Saucers. I think it's just a brilliant song, and it's kind of like a hidden gem of the album. So Caribou, I'm going to put that in Fantastic, I think. And the next album was quite a famous cover as well, totally over the top, totally Elton John, and it's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, which is a really good album actually, and I think it's better than Caribou, the previous album, and just really catchy songs, and it does feel like a concept album, and it has the single, in terms of the singles on it, it has Someone Saved My Life Tonight, which is a really important single for Elton John. It's obviously Bernie Taupin did the lyrics and Elton John did the music, and it's about Bernie Taupin saving Elton John's life when he was feeling suicidal at that point. So Captain Fantastic, I'm going to put that in Jules. Okay, and we now move on to Rock of the Westies, which feels a bit of a kind of low-key album, and it had on it Island Girl, which was a US #1. It wasn't a massive hit in the UK though, but I think it's an okay album, but it feels a bit like, I don't know, a bit flat after Captain Fantastic, which was quite over the top and flamboyant. This feels a bit more flat. So I'm going to put this in Fantastic, because it's still a good album, but not compared to the other albums. Okay, and the next album after this was actually a live album, Here and There, which was recorded in 1974, although this album came out in 1976, and it was taken from a couple of concerts. From the first half of the concert was from the Royal Festival Hall in London in May 1974, and the next disc came from the Madison Square Garden concert at New York and Thanksgiving night in November, which of course was the night that John Lennon was on stage as well, and he would eventually go on to get back with Yoko after this concert. But Elton didn't particularly like the album actually as well, and he felt it was kind of the record company really wanted to put this out. So there's some good moments on it, but I'm going to put it in Too Low to Be a Hero. It's almost like there's too much on it to really enjoy it. Okay, and the next album is Blue Moves, which is a really underrated album. I think it's a really good album, and doesn't really get much kind of. It's not one of the most well-known albums, but it's another double album after Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. I just think it's really good. I like it. It's quite downplayed, but it's got another favourite song of Elton John's of mine is Tonight, which is amazing orchestra. It also has Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word. So I'm going to put this in Jules because I think it's a underappreciated album, a very good album at that. And we now come on to the album A Single Man, which was Elton's first album without Bernie Taupin doing any of the lyrics for it. But I think it's quite a good album actually. It's not one of his most well-known ones, but it has the classic song For Guy, which is a beautiful song, and Part-Time Love, which is a bit like Don't Go Breaking My Heart. It's quite catchy. So I think it's a really underappreciated album, so I'm going to put that in Fantastic. Okay. And then Elton John, his next album, we're going to put in here, although it wasn't released at the time, this concert came from 1979. It's From Moscow, which was a short film of Elton John being one of the first artists to play in Russia, 1979. And if people can see it, it's a really good video of the show actually, and just it's quite interesting because the army are there. Obviously, it's a different time, and the army are there, and they don't want people standing up. And at the concerts, so Elton's like sort of wanting them to stand up, and it's just on live. It's just Elton on piano and Ray Cooper on percussion. So it's just them, but it works really well. Just there's no other instrumentation, but it's really good the way it's done. And it's amazing because you see the people standing up at the end, they just get so into the music and kind of getting away from that oppression that they're living in. Okay, it's a really good album actually. I'm going to put this in Jules because I really like just the bareness of it, just the piano, Elton singing, and the percussion of Ray Cooper. And we now move on to the last album of the 70s, and unfortunately it's the purest album. It's called Victim of Love, and this was another album that didn't have Bernie Taupin involved. And it's kind of like disco-y songs, but it feels like it just doesn't work properly, and it just doesn't seem like Elton John that we know. And it just sounds very dated, and there wasn't really any big hits off it either. So I'm going to put this in the bottom tier in Victim of No Love. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, let us know what your thoughts are on these rankings that I've done for the Elton John 70s albums on the Trimming the Musical Fat website or Facebook page. Okay, thank you, bye.